today is on the EU Space Act from the perspective of uh, third countries or non-European partners. Now, this webinar has been organized in furtherance of the consultation which the European Commission had launched on the draft EU Space Act, which was released a few months ago. Now, GraySpace Consulting, along with SATCOM India Association, had given out its position paper for on the EU Space Act. Now, this webinar is just a series of conversations which we aim to have with all of the stakeholders so that people can voice their concerns or better understand certain aspects of the proposed regulation. Now, all in all, uh, while drafting the position paper, SATCOM India and us, we believe that the space legislation that Europe plans to put forth is good. It's good for the global space industry, but at the same time, it would be really nice if third country stakeholders were also able to voice their opinions or be a part of this collaborative process. Now, currently, just in this webinar, we have third country stakeholders from India, Japan, Australia, even from the United States. And just to give an example, we've seen that even India and Europe over the last 2 decades have had a constantly growing relationship in the space sector. We've seen not only through ISRO's launch, but through downstream activities, we've seen that there has been an ever increasing involvement. And we believe that with the upcoming Space Act, there will be more and more involvement between these countries. So we want to use this opportunity to already start having conversations around how we can increase collaborations because of the Space Act. Now, in this roundtable today, we have distinguished speakers from the European Commission, from the Parliament, industry leaders, and also people from regional space associations. And I believe that this will be a constructive way for us to start having a conversation. Now, thank you all for joining us. I will now invite Mr. Anil Prakash, who's the Director General of SATCOM India Association, to give his opening remarks.
Thank you. Namaste. Good afternoon and very warm welcome to all of our distinguished speakers, partners, participants joining us from across the world. I welcome you all for today's roundtable on draft EU Space Act perspective from non-EU partners country. It is our honor to open today's important dialogue on the draft EU Space Act perspective from non-EU partners country. A timely and important dialogue following the European Commission public consultation to establish harmonized framework for space governance across European Union. SIA-India, on behalf of Indian space sector, has submitted its formal response to European Commission in collaboration with GraySpace Law and Policy Consulting based at Brussels. This submission on 7th November among the very few from Asia marks a defining moment in India's growing engagement as a proactive contributor to global space policy. It reflects our collective belief that the voices of emerging So it is also with highlighting that our collaboration were accorded the opportunity to participate in parliamentary proceeding in the Act, a recognition of seriousness, credibility, and global relevance of the joint efforts. This initiative goes beyond analyzing the draft. It seeks to initiate a wider global dialogue on how space can become a domain of shared opportunity and mutual growth. It brings together stakeholders to engage directly with the European policymaker, regulator, and industry leaders, reaffirming that a cooperation, not a competition, must anchor and feature of space governance. The draft EU Space Act has implications that extended well beyond Europe. For this country, third country partners such as India, Japan, Australia, USA, and other deeply integrated across the global space value chain. This is an opportunity to help to shape framework that advance innovation, sustainability, and equitable access for all. We are privileged to have with us today's key voices involved in shaping the EU Space Act, along with leading perspective from Australia, Japan, and the United States. This diversity of representation underscores a central principle that SIA India stands for: shared prosperity. The global space economy must evolve as a community bound not only for commerce, but by common vision of responsible growth and inclusive and long-term collaboration. As we begin today's discussion, I welcome all participants to share their insight openly and constructively. Our dialogue today aims to chart pathway for interoperability, mutual trust, and shared standard that enable Europe and its partners to strengthen space safety, sustainability, and competitiveness together. The additional insight and recommendation emerging from this roundtable will consolidate as an addendum to our earlier contribution to the European Commission consultation. Together, let's use this dialogue to reaffirm our shared vision, a vision of space as a domain of partnership, prosperity, and progress for all. Thank you, and look forward to meaningful and looking forward forward-looking exchange. Namaste.
Thanks, Anil. Thank you so much for your opening remarks. And now that we've already set the tone, I would like to call upon Ms. Zuzana Mazanova, who's the head of unit for the single space market at the Directorate General of Defense Industry and Space, European Commission. Zuzana, it would be a pleasure if you could give your remarks on the EU Space Act and also share a bit of your thoughts on international collaborations.
Very good. Thank you very much to both of you, Mr. Prakash, Ganatra. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. It's a real honor to have this opportunity to briefly present you the EU Space Act, the legislative proposal for regulation on the safety, resilience, and environmental sustainability of space activities, which was tabled by the European Commission on the 25th of June. I will do introductory remarks. I will focus on 4 areas: objectives, scope, technical requirements, and then, as you said, the impact on the third country operators. The EU Space Act is the first European regulatory answers to the emerging risks for safety and security to space infrastructures and satellites. Why do we propose this? This is a very clear, we see a clear need here, because clearly the outer space is becoming increasingly congested. We see this currently. There are 20,000 satellites that are up there in orbits, out of which 12,000 are operational. But what we see is a prediction that in the next decade, this number of satellites, of new satellites, will increase to more than 50,000. Therefore, we see that the risk also for collisions with the amount of space debris that is already there is quite high. In addition to that, we also see that the risk, cyber risk especially, and also physical risks to satellites and our space infrastructures are progressively increasing. Hence, we see a need to act. Therefore, the objective of the EU Space Act is to lay down the rules for establishment and functioning of the internal market of space activities and space-based data that are generated through the use and operation of infrastructures. What is our ambition? Our ambition is twofold. First of all, we need to, with this act, we aim to increase the competitiveness of our companies, and secondly, is to increase the protection of our space assets. When it comes to competitiveness, just to give you a bit of an outlook of where we stand here in Europe, we have today 13 different national space laws in the EU that have a different level of national requirements for authorizations to carry out space activities. These requirements differ from one member state to another, and this affects then the competitiveness of the European space industry, especially when they are acting in cross-border exchanges. With the proposal of the EU Space Act, what we want to do is to simplify and create a common, stable, predictable legal framework in these 3 areas: in safety, resilience, and environmental sustainability. These common frameworks and rules will help us then and help the industry to become more competitive, because the rule book will be the same. The competitiveness of the European companies will be also affected in case we create stricter rules for our companies in Europe than elsewhere. That is why the Space Act as such applies to all operators that want to provide their services on the EU single market. Then what we also took into account, and which is very important for competitiveness, are smaller companies. For smaller companies and research institutions, we are proposing the so-called light regime to have proportionate measures to their side and to their capability to adapt and to comply. And to support also for these companies, we are proposing a number of supporting measures, such as capacity building or technical assistance. This will also help the smaller companies to offset possible implementation costs. The second objective for this Space Act is the protection of our own space assets. As you know very well, space is interconnected, and if there is a risk to one satellite, such a risk is a risk to all satellites that are around. So that's why we need to have these common rules that would ensure that all space assets are better protected. Now, what is in and what is out of the scope of this proposal? The Space Act, as we propose it, would apply to all space operators and data providers that are providing the services on the EU single market. And so these are both our own EU companies, but also companies coming from third countries. It will impact only the commercial and civilian satellites. It's very important to underline that any military space objects that are used for defense or national security purposes are excluded from the scope of the regulation. And we believe that companies will also have sufficient time to prepare for the implementation and compliance, because we propose that the regulation would apply as of 1st of January 2030, and for the satellites that are launched after that date, so that we see that there is sufficient time to get accustomed. And also we will produce the guidelines, of course, to see how the compliance could be done better. Now, what kind of technical requirements are we talking about? So we are proposing a set of common requirements that, as I said, revolve around three topics: safety, resilience, and environmental sustainability, that would then consistently apply in the single market. So first of all, we propose rules on space debris mitigation, collision avoidance, orbital traffic rules to ensure the safety of launchers and satellites. These proposals are built upon existing international guidelines and recommendations, in particular the UN long-term sustainability guidelines, which are the guiding principle for us. Secondly, we propose rules for cybersecurity risk management. This is particular for space missions, and we are basing ourselves on existing cybersecurity legislation that is already existing in the EU to ensure the resilience of the space infrastructures. And thirdly, for environmental sustainability, what we will do, we will propose a methodology to calculate the environmental footprint of space activities to promote more responsible and sustainable space activities. This has not yet been done. This is something that we will then do in the future. When it comes to the third country space operators, which is most of the audience that we have here today, what does it mean? What is the impact? So to ensure the common baseline and fair competition, the EU Space Act will apply indistinctly to EU and non-EU space operators which intend to access the single market, as we said. This means that third country space operator will need to lodge an application to the EU Space Program Agency. In the application, they will need to demonstrate compliance with these technical requirements. And the objective is to assess this compliance then, and if positive, register the operator in the Union Register of Space Objects. This is how it works. In addition to that, the Union is open also, of course, to recognize the equivalence of jurisdictions of third countries if that jurisdiction has in place rules that are comparable to the ones that are established by the Space Act. And in addition to that, we have also a third option, that we as a European Union, we can also conclude international agreements with third countries that would facilitate mutual recognition of rules, technical assessment, and potential derogation. With regard to derogations, there I need to say a very important point, that specific derogations are foreseen for the use of launchers or space services and data arising from governmental satellites provided by third country operators, or other space services that are provided by operators that are not registered in this Union register in case there is an emergency. So in case there is a need to launch a satellite with a launcher that is not registered in that register, there is a possibility, there is a way to have an exception for that. Finally, where do we stand today? So today, the proposal, as I said, was tabled in June by the European Commission. and it follows the so-called, in the EU jargon, ordinary legislative procedure process, which means that we as the European Commission propose this legislative proposal to the European Council and to the European Parliament, and they are now analyzing this proposal and coming up with their positions as we speak. So this is ongoing. In parallel, we also, as you correctly said, Ganatra, we also had the public stakeholder consultation, because this is a part of the better regulation as that the EU does, that once we not only consult the stakeholder in preparation of the legislative act, but also once the legislative act is published, we have this 8 weeks of consultation. We just closed last Friday. And we are very grateful to SIA-India to propose and to come up with suggestions. Also to all the others, we received more than 100 of proposals. So this is very good to see that there is a lot of interest from also private companies, but also institutions to come back and tell us what their views are. So we are currently analyzing this, but these are very valuable feedback for us, and we are very grateful for that. And to conclude, just to say, clearly the EU Space Act is definitely needed. This is what we hear from everywhere and is expected. So with this proposal, we are setting a standard and contributing to the long-term safety, sustainability, and resilience of our space activities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you so much for, just giving us a full presentation in in less than 10 minutes, just giving everyone an overview of the Space Act. That was, I think, very interesting for everyone who's here on the webinar. If I may just quickly ask you two questions regarding, what you said. One is, could you tell everyone, as an approximate, what would be the timeline that, we see for the implementation of this act? And whilst the act goes through the parliamentary process and the implementation process, is there a way in which third country partners such as SATCOM India Association could be, a part of this process beyond the consultation as well? Is there a way in which these voices can be involved while this process is going on?
Thank you very much. So when it comes to the timeline, of course, as I said, we are in this so-called ordinary legislative procedure, so it's not in the hand of the Commission to define the timeline. The timeline really depends on the amount of time that the EU member state will need in the Council of the EU to discuss this proposal, and on the other hand, how much the European Parliament will need to come up with their draft report on the proposal. Now, what we hear is it is possible that there might be a vote in the European Parliament around the summer next year. So that is an indicator of a certain timeline. But what happens afterwards, once the positions of the European Parliament and the Council are clear, we come to the so-called process of the trilogues. And this is the time when the three institutions come together and we try to see what is the possibility of having a final text. So, I mean, I can have some personal estimations. If all would be going well, we could have this act adopted maybe in 2027. This would be my estimation. When it comes to the way how to influence the process from the third countries, this is, I mean, of course, you as an industry association, you are open to speak to anyone that is in the process. So you correctly express your opinion through the public consultation, which is the very good first step. And if you wish to bring it on, you can also try to see whether there are ways to talk to the member states or to the European Parliament. I mean, really, the drafting is now in their hands. So it's for us in the Commission. It's a good feedback, but drafting is really happening there.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you so much for giving us a fantastic overview and answering these key questions. We're now going to go to our next speaker today, which is Mr. Nicholas Ninas, who served as a member of the European Parliament from 2019 to 2024 and has been one of Europe's leading advocates for space policy. During his time in the Parliament, Nicholas was extensively focused on the EU space program and has constantly advanced sustainability criteria and a broader vision for the European space framework. So, Nicholas, it would be a pleasure if you could now just give us your remarks on the EU Space Act, since you've seen it right from the inception, and if you have something else to say about its international exposure as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak on this matter. Yeah, we have been talking about the space law, or the Space Act as it's called now, for quite a while now, actually. So I think 5 years ago, I started going around with this topic, and back then, as you probably all know, space was in a different position. And so also the need for such a law was viewed differently. And just to take into perspective where we stand as Europe, as you know, the EU is not a state, a nation by itself, but really rather a confederation of states, with very clear rules on what the EU can govern and what it cannot govern. And one rule is, for example, that it must not govern anything related to space and research. However, as you all know, space has transformed itself from being a purely research or mostly research-based application to becoming more and more privately driven, becoming more and more of a business case, and also becoming more and more relevant for security and defense. And so these topics have grown into something different. And here, the European laws or the treaties say everything related to the single market actually has to be governed by the EU competences, or is under the EU competences, in order to create a single level playing field for everybody participating in the EU market. This is one of the fundamentals of the EU. So we had to transform this understanding of, is space becoming, something relevant for the single market? And it actually has taken us quite a long time to advocate for that and to make people, and especially politicians who rarely like to give up own competences and own power, to make them understand that it's just very important for European businesses to have a common framework that it falls under. The other aspect that we saw is sustainability. And that is a topic that we all know for multiple years now, but really only in the past 10 to 15 years, it has accelerated by the number of the amount of satellites and debris in orbit. And the fact that we want to do more business in space means that there's possibly more potential dangers in form of more satellites and more debris. We want to make it available for everybody, so that means we need to make sure that it's secure and it's available for everybody. And this brought us to the problem that, in the end, a little bit like climate change, this really is a problem for everybody because we are all participating in it. We all rely on the usability of the orbits and outer space. And we all rely on the fact that everybody does a proper job in reducing the amount of debris that they create and also taking it back from outer space. So honestly, this really is a problem not just for Germany, not just for France, not just for the EU, but really for the whole community of states and for the whole world. Well, we all also know the situation, international regulation is more than difficult, and we know that the Outer Space Treaty is not completed to the extent for the purpose that we have right now, and doesn't help us in this. And this was really the fundament of which we try to build up the European Space Act. So the European Space Act really comes from the idea to ensure sustainability and a level playing field for everybody, not just in Europe, but because we can only govern in Europe, of course, we're going to start with Europe. And so this is where we started, and this is how we started the debate. And there was also two very important aspects. There was the anti-satellite missile test from Russia, but also, as we know, from other players. But the one from Russia gave the straw that broke the camel's back for us as the European Parliament in December of, I think, 2020. And so we had a declaration that said we need to do something about this, and we need space traffic management rules, and we want the Commission to propose something for that. That was the first clear question for the Commission, because one drawback that we have in European democracy is that neither the Parliament nor the Council can propose laws themselves. Only the Commission has that right. So we asked the Commission to do that. The second thing was then that we have established IRIS², as you probably know, the connectivity program, a satellite constellation newly built up that I was involved in. And in there, we also said, we need these capabilities, but we also accept the responsibility that comes with it. If we want to have a secure and sustainable space, we need to act accordingly, and Europe must lead by example by saying we will follow strict sustainability criteria in this constellation, but also use these to further out how we do business in space for every other and every upcoming development. And so we included 4 sustainability criteria: light pollution, CO2 emissions, but especially also the question of space debris active removal and space debris mitigation. And these 4 criteria we handed to the Commission and told them, please, do more on this, be more detailed, and make sure that we, have clear rules for that. It's what we called an implementing act. And the Commission has gotten these tasks from the Parliament, and also, by the way, from the member states. And, it's of course not just on that. I know that they have been working on these topics for a long time. I've been speaking to a lot of Commission officials on this matter, and they've been working on this. And so they were also thankful to having a clear guidance from Parliament and the member states to do something. And now I'm really thankful that they proposed this Space Act, space law, I would say, but anyway. Finally, I think we are here a little bit too late, but that's water under the bridge. In the end, it matters how we go abroad. And Susanna has already mentioned a lot of very important points. These rules don't just apply for everybody in Europe, but will also apply for everybody who wants to do business in Europe. So even if you're just, providing services in Europe, you will have to follow the same set of rules. And the idea behind that is what I mentioned in the beginning. In the end, sustainability in space can only be achieved if the whole world works on this together. If everybody takes their trash back home, if we make sure that everything stays sustainable and neat and usable. So this means, and Susanna has mentioned this, that there's of course the possibility for states to co-opt with the European Union to say we follow basically the same rules. If we see it's the same idea and everything behind, the Commission has the possibility to grant that and then say, the rules applicable in both the EU and the third member states. So it's fair. But what I would also like to express is, we don't have a space law in every state on the world. A lot of states don't have a space law. I haven't thought about it. Some of them have space activities, others don't. But I think it's important to think about it. And even for those states who don't have a big space program, not as big as India or Europe or any others, but even for them, it could be interesting to think about the future if they want to have a space program in the future, maybe. And this is also a moment for dialogue, because I think it's important that we look at this proposal as one that is not just, setting the stone to make Europe or getting Europe the best possible situation. I think it's a fair proposal that can really be used for everybody. It is not, as we have seen in other space laws across the world, one that really favors just one nation on this planet, but really gives the option for big, small, medium-sized states to really come across and have their rights, the current and also future rights, being presented and being represented. And so this has to be also a form of dialogue. So I think it's not just a dialogue between industry and administration, as we do right now, Susanna presented already, but also it has to be a dialogue between EU and non-EU states to check out if these rules are something that can be applicable in this form or similar form, maybe in the end across the world, because this is really what we need for sustainability in space. It's a level playing field in outer space for the whole world. And with that, I'll keep it here, and I hope I've answered your question. Otherwise, please come back to me. And yeah, thank you again for the invitation and for this great exchange.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your views. Just to tie in what Zuzana said and what you've said, what Europe aims to do is to have something that is a GDPR style effect law for space. And as both of you rightly pointed out, that this is something that is not necessary only for Europe. The aim is not only to increase competitiveness within Europe, but this is for the sake of the rest of the world as well, from a perspective of sustainability. And as long as that everyone is open to have a dialogue with non-EU partners, I think this can be what is required in the space sector. This act is something, because for long we've been talking about sustainability in space, and we have different guidelines given out by different institutions and different countries. And if we are able to collectively work on this, I think we do believe that this could become the holy grail for space activities or legislation for space activities. Having said that, I'm going to go to our next speaker today, that is Sarah Daridon, who's a research fellow and lead on regulatory affairs at the European Space Policy Institute. Just for everyone else here, European Space Policy Institute is a leading think tank and probably the only think tank focused on space policy. And they provide analysis and recommendations not only to European institutions, but also to several international partners. So Sarah, I think I have introduced you well enough, and I will now hand it over to you to give a short presentation.
Thank you so much. And yes, I would like to start by thanking you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I will try to present our internal work on the EU Space Act. Actually, the first slide was dedicated to a brief presentation of SP, but you have done it perfectly. As mentioned, we are a think tank fully dedicated to space. We are based in Vienna, with also a representation in Brussels. So if we go immediately in some food for thoughts and some critical aspects related to the EU Space Act, our presentation is based on the position paper we have been writing in the last few months. We have the QR code here in case you would like to read it. It's quite comprehensive. So starting from what has already been mentioned, here it's the legal foundation for the EU Space Act. So already mentioned by the presentation from the Commission is the fact that this is based on the internal market, so Article 114. We have a proposal for a regulation, even though there was some type of outspoken opposition from certain member states preferring instruments such as a directive. And the result of this draft is indeed a set of articles, 119 articles with 10 annex, which underpin to impact assessment. The scope of today's webinar really look on the fact that the Act will apply not only to EU, but also to non-EU entities that are providing space service in the EU. And as already mentioned, the scope is quite broad. So what we are looking at is an Act that really let's say, try to deal with satellite operator, collision avoidance service provider, primary providers of space-based data, and iOS operating satellites. So quite a broad scope. Already mentioned, it will not be applicable for military and national security related space access. It will not be applicable beyond GEO. And what is also interesting and will really help us to read the Act per se is the fact that exclude exclusive competencies of the member states. So when we are looking at aspects related to market access, landing rights, spectrum related activities and liability, this, at least based on the current draft, it's out of scope. If we move a bit more on what is the aspiration and what are the emerging questions behind that, what we see is actually an Act that proposes quite a multi-layer governance structure with an authorized authorization framework where once applied in one single member state of the EU will also apply and be recognized across all the member states, meaning that beyond that the national authorization process will remain intact. Why they decided to do so is is indeed the fact that this is also the reasoning behind the legal foundation of Article 114 of the TFEU, which is the fact that there is a perception of a disjointed legal landscape, with several member states having adopted national space law. We have currently 14 in the EU context. Actually, even in this context, it's interesting to mention that when looking at the literature, there is difficult to find a hard evidence of this fragmentation, and what is usually referred to is almost a de facto harmonization. So even here we need to be careful on how to consider that, and there is a strategic question, of course, on what type of industry or member state will then benefit, also based on their actual implemented national space law, which of those will benefit by the disadvantage or be disadvantaged by the regulation. Another interesting point is really related to what is the Commission and agency broad investigation power, which of course will need to bring some question related to how to balance those and some type of legal and sovereignty concerns. Then when we focus on the enforcements, this remains quite a key issue in terms of implementation of it, especially when looking at the extraterritoriality, because of course, even though we definitely welcome the initiative of the EU Space Act, we need to be careful that to avoid a situation where actually companies in EU will be almost the vehicle of the extraterritoriality, so pressuring those that are related to their country to then comply with the EU Space Act, so almost creating an additional burden for EU operators and EU companies. And again, as already been mentioned, the mutual recognition principle, so the equivalent ruling, also in that case, there is a need to be careful that this does not really create or it's an obstacle to a proper level playing field where indeed EU operators can apply the same rules that are applied globally. If we move from, let's say, the aspiration to the technical requirements that are behind, and we look at the challenges related to what is in the Act in terms of safety, sustainability, and resilience, the important point to mention is indeed the fact that within such technical draft, it's important to really leverage the expertise, the technical expertise and competencies of the member states, as well as international organizations such as the European Space Agency, and also, of course, the expertise of international partners. There is a gradual regime, gradual regulatory regimes. Here we could already identify some discrepancies in terms of requirement with some rules applying only to EU and not to third country operators. So really a careful examination is needed to making sure that there is an actual level playing field when looking at the technical requirement. And also the fact that they already mentioned increasing cost for manufacturing and launch will not be an additional obstacle for what is already a, let's say, ongoing profitability challenge within the space sector. This also reflects on the fact that unclear requirement by definition can discourage innovation and entrepreneurship when looking at the space sector, which is of course somehow described as of a high pace, agility and risk-taking. Another challenge could be related to the forum shopping. So really making sure that we are not creating a situation where more favorable, less stringent and faster national regulatory regimes will be using instead of operating and requiring authorization within the EU context. And finally, on the positive note, there is, of course, the fact that this additional requirement related to safety, sustainability, and resilience could be a way of developing new market within the context of SSC, iOS, etc. So, as well as we have seen in the cyber security domain. So that's definitely on a positive note to be considered. So to summarize, when we look at the type of authorization we have in mind when looking at the third country operators side, I will not go in detail, of course, but three challenges that need to be considered are definitely the aspect related to extraterritoriality, so the risk of indirectly being responsible for non-EU operators' compliance on the EU side. sometimes unclear criteria of reciprocity when looking also in terms of the possibility of mutual recognition. And finally, some challenges related to the competitive distortion when technical requirements will be different based on the type of authorization. I will conclude with this last slide, and I hope I'm not taking too much time. But just to conclude by saying that, of course, this is a sign of a EU ambition to play a broader, more strategic role in space. Also linking it with non-space policies, which is definitely interest. We need to be careful when looking at the timeline, because a target by 2030 also means that fast-moving commercial developments will be already fully deployed and in place. So again, without looking into also provisions that are related to market stimulating action, this could be an obstacle to the level playing field that is the objective of the Act. And of course, a lot of the result and the outcome of the EU Space Act will be related to all the work that will be dealing with the implementing act, the standardization process, but even more the regulatory culture that will be established and surrounding the EU Space Act. To conclude, of course, this is the true value of this act is really on potentially unlocking the EU potential to lead globally in certain domains of increasing relevance, such as safety, sustainability, and this, of course, need to be done in partnership with all the actors that are involved in such a goal. But it's also, from an European perspective, important to mention that the fact that this ambition to deal with norms on this topical domain will be relevant if this will be also linked with a robust program, competitive industrial base, and sufficient for funding. So let's say the upcoming MFF, as well as other funding cycle within the European context, will be pivotal in really reaching this objective. I will conclude here. Thank you again for giving me the floor for this brief presentation, and I'm happy to reply to any question you might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for giving us your valuable insights, specifically with respect to, the implementation, the next steps. I think that's going to be very beneficial for everyone who's listening here. I have a few questions, but I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip them for now and just go ahead to our next speaker for today. So after we've heard some voices from Europe, we are going to have Mr. Keyur Gandhi, who's the Director of Space Regulatory and Policy Affairs at GraySpace. GraySpace is in a unique position because they are not only based out of India, but also have significant presence in Europe. And I think Keyur can give us a good insight into what the EU Space Act means, not only for the Indian industry, but what it means in terms of future business prospects that they want to pursue in Europe. So Keyur, I hand over the mic to you now.
Thank you, Devanshu. First of all, I'd like to begin by thanking SIA-India and GraySpace Consulting for organizing this and for setting the base for the event today. I'd like to begin by taking a minute or so to give a background on what's happening in the sector in general, especially when we look at it from the commercial entity standpoint, which are not necessarily large operators. Today, the focus is primarily driven on reducing the cost of data or services for the end customer. And it is to that effect that everyone, starting from manufacturer of satellite systems to payloads to launch service providers to the ground segment and value-added services, customers are trying to focus their efforts. In doing that, of course, there have been some lean approaches which have been identified to service these demands, and those are causing problems today. And I can very much appreciate the concerns with and the considerations or the basic principles on which the proposal for the EU Space Act has been modeled. These are very valid and have been recurring legal questions to examine to understand how do we as a global community work together in the space sector and the efforts of the European Union to harmonize the framework can necessarily serve as an example. With this background, there are some key points that I would like to share and highlight, which could be inputs or concerns, because I necessarily do not have all the answers here. One of the key concerns is when we look at the Act with the focus on making sure that the space stays safe and sustainable, it is a valid concern because we need to leave some space and space for our future generations. The bottlenecks start coming in when we start answering the how. Specifically, for example, today when we talk about looking at equivalence of standards or regulatory frameworks in foreign countries, while any act is being implemented, the standards are always dynamic, the mechanisms are always dynamic. So that leaves the current pool of emerging space entities questioning whether that would be a long-term solution or whether there is enough predictability even if equivalence is granted. Second, when we look at the mechanism of how to establish that the space activities being done are in compliance with the proposed framework or not, the concept of approaching qualified technical bodies and then having to substantiate with adequate technical details of the system is not just a challenge from the perspective of sharing too much information, which would be IP sensitive, but is also a strong export control consideration. So if there could be procedural aspects or there could be some additions that can be done to that, and maybe that would make it simpler to work in the European market and with European entities. I think coming to the perspective of working with European entities, I'd like to take an example here, which is closely related to one of the missions that is supposed to happen, where the satellite is from one country. We have customers on board the satellite from different countries, including Europe, of course. We have ground segment and launch from 3 other countries. Now, because of the way the ultimate operator who's supposed to get licensed for the particular space service in Europe is supposed to demonstrate compliance with certain standards, this has a downstream effect substantially. This will result not only in a situation where other organizations might necessarily adapt, but there might also be a cost implication for EU space actors to access non-EU services on an immediate basis, because these are very steady and scalable systems which have been built in organizations over the years, and it may take some time to cope up with the requirements that are there. Some open points such as interpretations on what would qualify as an establishment under the Act is still open for interpretation, especially coupled with the requirement to have a local representative. That's slightly tricky, especially for smaller companies which are just starting their way out, or even for larger companies which are just making their headway into the space sector. Having said that, I think so far the recommendations or the challenges that I've mentioned are primarily modeled on the assumption that everyone is working in the favor of the spirit of the proposed act and the regulation. But of course, we also have the strong possibility that more and more jurisdictions might want to create their own definition of what are those qualifying principles, or what are those technical assessment methods which would have to be followed in order to get any authorizations to undertake space activities. So there is a significant need to increase the efforts on international outreach, like as is happening in this webinar, to see that as a community with strong ties, the space community can shape up together, because there is a very small chance in the space sector that a jurisdiction or its community can go forward without having any contribution in the value chain from other countries. Last but not the least, which is, I think, one of the most important aspects here, when it comes to the cost of compliance. This cost of compliance will certainly reflect in the downstream applications, availability, and the cost of data and services for the end users. So if there could be incentives which are not just limited to EU, but also extended to non-EU entities for complying with these standards, becoming a part of the Space Objects Register, and working with the European Union to make it successful, then that could be a really great step forward. Talking especially from a focused use case of Earth observation satellite operators, I think when we look at constellations, it's not necessary that there would be large constellations. It could be a set of 4 to 5 satellites which have lifetime of less than 3 years, which are made in such a way so that there could be a lot of ease, not just technically, but also in terms of getting authorizations and getting easier administrative mechanisms to approve these missions. We need to especially look at these separately, because they may not fit in the bracket of startups or MSMEs, but do definitely have a long-term impact on the availability of data. And EO data especially, we are looking at frameworks which range from needing a strict authorization to start providing data from certain satellites, to now also seeing single source software platforms which give you access to imagery from essentially many operators from within the global community. Coming to geostationary satellites, doing that assessment periodically, while it is necessary, geostationary orbit still relatively remains to be more stable, less prone to crowding, and not so much prone to being overly populated as immediately. And that essentially also serves as a backbone for the communications infrastructure, which is there today. And today, when the need for financial and digital inclusion across the globe is so high, and as the reliance on value-added services, be it OTT platforms or digital payment systems, continues to increase, we should definitely try to work towards a system that would bring some parity between these different kind of cases. So that's my time. Thank you everyone once again, and a special thank you to all of my co-speakers who made the time today to participate in this program and engage with the Indian community. Thank you.
Thank you, Keyur. Thank you so much. I believe the insights that you gave and some of the concerns that you've given is what a lot of different members have from outside of Europe, and it's also found its way in the position paper that we've submitted to the Commission, because several members have raised quite similar concerns. So thanks a lot for voicing it here and bringing it out in the open. Really appreciate that. I would quickly now like to move on to our next speaker today, that is Cécile Amin, who is the Director of Regulatory Affairs of SES Europe. Cécile brings also a very unique flavor to this, because SES is again a global player, and they not only speak from the perspective of the European industry, but can also give us more insight on how some of their international partners are thinking about this. And I also have to say that Cécile and his team have been quite instrumental in shaping the position paper. They've also given us quite a few insights during the whole process. So thanks, Cécile, and it's your time now.
Thank you. Thank you, Devanshu, and thank you for inviting SES to this panel. Yes, just in 2 words, maybe, about SES, inside and outside Europe. So we are a global player, and we are very much inside Europe, and actually depends on multiple jurisdictions within Europe, but also we depend on multiple jurisdictions outside Europe. So I think we are in a kind of a little bit unique situation where our multiple jurisdiction presence and dependence makes this proposal of the EU Space Act very interesting to look at, and raising a lot of questions. So we're based in Europe. We depend on several European laws. We are a member of the Global Satellite Operators Association based in Brussels. And I want immediately to say that a lot of comments were posted to the European Commission. The deadline was last Friday. Our comments, SES, are made public. The comments made by GISO are made public too, SIA-India as well. So you have, I think, nearly 100 comments made available there. I think they are all interesting, and some are really very, very good. I must say that I completely subscribe to the views developed by SP, and especially I think SP puts the finger on a lot of issues concerning implementation and enforcement, which will need to be looked at very, very carefully. Now, on the text itself, I want to immediately say that we completely welcome and subscribe to the policy goals expressed by the European Commission and also people who used to be at the European Parliament, Niklas and Susanna. Of course, I think we need absolutely, and it's getting critical, we need to take measures on space safety. There's no doubt about that. But there is also no doubt that this needs to be global, right? And I think the European Commission can play a leading role, absolutely, on space safety. We should, put a lot of weight for Europe to act at international level in the United Nations and also with all potential third country and partner country. The space traffic management aspect is one of the most critical element, I think, and I know the European Commission works a lot on that. We are contributing to the EU SSTM stakeholders mechanism, and the EU SST, which is that instrument which was put in place some time ago already, and which now I think it's a partnership amongst nearly 20 European countries. That is a splendid tool. We should absolutely make this overall in Europe and try and enlarge it and encompass non-EU countries into it. So I think that's an instrument that we should support and defend. We believe in SES that this is something really good. Now, having said all these positive aspects, the Space Act is obviously welcome as regards the space safety, sustainability, and traffic management aspects. But I must really say very bluntly that it's raising a lot of questions and several concerns for us. So I'd like to list some of them, and I'm not going to be able to get into the details of each one, of course, but I'm very happy to respond to questions later on and further discuss privately. I think we already have concerns as regards the implementation for, well, our operations as SES, but I think this is also the case for other European players. What could be the impact on our non-European operations, considering that we have a lot of affiliates and satellites which are completely outside Europe, have nothing to do with Europe. But when you look at the definitions of the document, of the proposal, and how it is structured, it's really unclear whether there may be an impact on these non-European operations. So I totally appreciate that as soon as a data or service is reaching Europe, we want to have a mechanism whereby this is in scope, obviously. But this is not that simple because, for instance, in our case, we have many satellites which are used completely outside Europe with no connection with Europe, which are controlled from within Europe. Then what? Are we in scope or are we not in scope? That's already an issue in itself. Another example is we have many operations, say, in Latin America, and from there, it may well be that down the chain at some point, yes, indeed, a service provider could bring data to Europe. How is it going to work? Is it going to impact the whole value chain? Does it mean that everything back to the source of the value chain and space asset itself needs all of a sudden to be covered by the Space Act? It can really raise complicated aspects. So this is one issue. Another issue is the links with non-EU players. And I think that's a mystery to nobody that we so much depend on non-EU stakeholders, especially for the launching activities. So how is it going to work? The risk is that if we impose too much burden on non-EU players like launchers, the impact on cost, bureaucracy and cost, and the costs effect will probably have a very negative effect on our competitiveness. And again, I'm not saying that this should not be the case, that there is a linkage, but this is really a practical question. How is it going to, how are we going to avoid that there is a negative effect on our competitiveness? Another aspect is the question of licensing within the EU single market. It is one of the key objectives with the Space Act, right? And unfortunately, I would say really unfortunately, the European Commission doesn't have an exclusivity in these matters. For this aspect, that is raising the issue that ultimately licensing is still a national prerogative. Well, as an effect, the risk is really that we are going to freeze the fact that each country has its own licensing regime. So we will still depend on several licenses for our establishment, operations, launches, and other aspects. I can tell you that SES depends on nearly 10 different European countries because we have, ITU filings, we have operations from various countries. At the moment, it's not so much an issue because a lot of these countries have a very light regime. With the EU Space Act, everything is going to be elevated to a level that is much stronger and of course, with a real purpose. But as an effect, the risk is that we SES could be subject to several licenses within Europe, which is crazy. This is not the intention. I'm sure it's not the intention. So we have to be very careful here. Other aspect is secondary legislation, implementing acts. Of course, the European Commission cannot put everything in the Space Act itself. And obviously, we need to depend on secondary legislation that can be easily amended and updated. But now the question is, how can we make certain, absolutely certain, that the industry is fully involved in the preparation of these implementing acts and the drafting of these implementing acts? We're talking about the technical parameters. We're talking about limits. You need the experts from the sector. And of course, you will have to arbitrate. That will be your role. But you need to make sure that you've got the right inputs at the right moment. And by the way, there are so many provisions subject to the implementing acts in the proposal itself. We would ask the European Commission to prioritize them. Please, we have to, and do that with us, with the industry. Which areas need priority for the implementing acts? You are not going to be able to encapsulate everything and do everything together. That is not conceivable. Also, you should start preparing them before the act is adopted, right? As soon as possible, I would say. If possible, maybe 6-8 months before the Space Act is adopted, we should start working on the implementing acts. The sooner, the better. Two last points to finish on this long presentation, and thank you for your patience. Equivalence and, the way to agree with third countries. That looks great on the paper, let's be honest. And I know it already exists for other regulations. The risk we see is that if we don't have guarantees from the third countries, and I'm talking about written guarantees, if we don't have a proper agreement, the risk is that by having a unilateral decision to estimate that the third country regime is equivalent to ours, at the end of the day, we won't have the reciprocity. And this is precisely what we don't want. We want to make sure that if there is an equivalence agreed with one country, that means a reciprocity in market access and in terms of, rules being applicable to the sector. So we have to look at that very, very carefully. And finally, on cybersecurity resilience, this is a critical issue, absolutely. But I'm afraid the proposal is coming too late. We already have a legislation that is adopted and implemented and enforced now in Europe. We have at least 2 different key legislations, one directive called NIS2 and one regulation which is called Cybersecurity Act. These 2 pieces of legislation, we need to comply with them. In my company, we have a full team, working on all the different countries where we have to comply with each and every national regime. Of course, in an ideal world, we would prefer to have harmonization within Europe. But it's now that it's happening. And this Space Act is not going to be enforced before several years from now. So what's going to happen in several years? We'll have all of a sudden a completely different regime. I think that is too late. I'm sorry to say. We will be far down the line in a few years from now in dealing with cybersecurity. And we are not going to change everything and have a big bang in 4 or 5 years. That is not welcome. Thank you for your time and open to any questions.
Thank you, Cecile. Thank you so much for sharing the concerns of the industry around the EU Space Act. Before we move on to the next speaker, Susanna, do you want to say something for a quick minute to what Keyur and Cecile have said? Do you have anything to say? If not, we can proceed ahead.
Thanks a lot for giving me the word. I mean, because we are, I think, also running out of time. There is a number of things that I could say on all these comments that were raised, and I think because both Sarah said that this is in the paper of SP, and I understand that also Cecile, this is in the paper of SES. Give us a moment to analyze this, and then we can come back to you on a bilateral basis, because I don't think that this is in the interest of everyone to go into the details and analyze it right now. And I think there is maybe another speaker that is there, so let's do it in this way. Thank you.
Right. Thanks. So we're quickly going to move on to Mr. Dan Lloyd, who's the CEO of the Space Industry Association of Australia. Dan, can you now please give us your thoughts from the Australian perspective on the EU Space Act?
Good evening all, and thank you so much for the invitation to join. It is very late night in Australia. Take that as a sign of the high regard in which I hold SIA-India and the importance of this topic, particularly at the moment, to Australia and the Australian space industry. The most important context is, many of you would know, at IAC 2025 that we held in Sydney, our government announced that it is negotiating a cooperation agreement with the European Space Agency. And so the alignment and the potential collaboration, which we already enthusiastically engage with India, with the USA, can now be matched by a new level of enthusiasm and collaboration under a cooperation agreement, which hopefully will be concluded shortly. The most important thing to understand is Australia has a smaller scale industry, but with niche players who are now really breaking out into really significant scale. So Gilmore had its first successful orbital test launch earlier this year. Skycraft is deploying a global air tracking system. Fleet Space is transforming resource exploration, and Space Machines Company is collaborating very closely with India on a mission to test new forms of debris mitigation. So the opportunity for Australia to increase its collaboration really depends on the extent of the efficiency and the alignment of the licensing and regulatory regime. And our key request and plea is that maximum alignment, not only across European member states, which is very, very welcome and is really the key benefit of the Act, and we fully support it. Alignment across member states is very useful, but anything that can be done to also align across the USA, India, Japan, I think for all of us, that would be potentially transformative, because it would really unleash the most enthusiastic collaboration. And just really one main comment on the Act itself, which is, again, anything that can smooth alignment and mutual recognition of any complex requirements would be very welcome. The Register of Space Objects, the qualified technical bodies, all have equivalents, and sorting out whether they will be mutually recognised would be extremely helpful. And then I worry, having seen the European telecommunications legislation introduced, the single digital market, that member states generally do find ways to impose additional requirements, and particularly the discretion over dual use, I think, needs to be watched very, very closely. But overall, we're hugely supportive, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak this evening.
Thank you so much, Dan. Really, really appreciate your viewpoints here. Thanks once again, and also for staying up so late to do this.
Not at all.
Still join. Yeah. Next, I'm going to quickly call Francois Poisson from Space Tide Association in Japan. So Francois, I'm going to let you give a quick introduction on Space Tide and also give your views on the Space Act.
Thank you very much, and good evening / afternoon, everybody. It's slightly less late in Japan than in Australia, but it doesn't mean we have any less regard for SIA-India and GraySpace for inviting us, and we're really I'm really happy to be here. Space Tide, very briefly, is a Tokyo-based non-profit organization founded 10 years ago with the purpose to act as a neutral industry hub for the space sector in Japan, and looking also at our allied countries in Asia. So without further ado, I mean, I think I can be really brief, because most of the reactions from the Japanese space industry have been very clearly expressed, in particular through Keiyo Gandhi's presentation. I would like to start by highlighting the strong ties that the EU and the Japan space industries have had for a very long time, both on the industry side and also on the national space programs side. And all actors that we have talked to fully recognize the goal of the regulation to ensure safety, resilience, and sustainability of space activities is a goal that we can all align behind. Now, the current draft raised a lot of discussions in Japan within the industry, and also between in various interministerial forums. I know METI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, has individually interviewed 26 major companies concerned by the extraterritorial applicability of the Act. And the general idea, that the general feeling that has emerged from these discussions and from our interaction with our industry is that some specific provision may not have been sufficiently discussed at the international level with non-EU stakeholders. There are a few examples. First of all, the broad and direct impact on third country companies would impose some additional burden and regulatory risk. And in particular, there was some concerns and worries about the authority of European regulators to inspect companies in their home country to ensure compliance with the standards. In addition to that, the perception is that there's a lack of clear and flexible path to equivalence, which is something other speakers have mentioned as well. And the main idea that both industry and governments have been conveying to us is that while there can be an alignment on the high-level objectives, each country should be allowed some leeway in determining the way they want to achieve these objectives and the approaches that they take to reach it. So if these are given due consideration in determining equivalence, this is great, but this is something that the local government would really like to discuss into more detail. The second aspect is about the fairness to non-EU stakeholders. So we understand that there is a clear goal to simplify authorization for EU-based companies, in that one authorization would be valid for all countries, although now listening to Cecil, it might not be as simple as that. But in the case of third country companies, there may be multiple regulation overlaps, actually almost certainly, which would put them at a disadvantage. And this is not helped by some unclarity in the scope of application that have been also mentioned by other speakers. And finally, the determination of the compliance cost. Some estimations vary, and the numbers proposed by the proponent of the Act may be a little bit underestimated in some circumstances. And at the same time, the timing is key for implementation. And actually, 2030 is literally tomorrow for a lot of the projects in development. So the message that I would like to leave you with is that a call for practicality and considering the local non-EU players' own design and operation capabilities in determining the compliance with the rules. So all this still needs to be discussed in an international forum with due regard for the various approaches adopted by non-EU partners. we are all in the same boat and completely subscribe to the high-level goals, and would like to keep working together, industry to industry and government to government, to achieve better sustainability, safety, and resilience of space activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francois. Thank you so much for your views. I'm going to call our last speaker for today. That is Mr. Jordi Casanova, who's the head of EU Public Policy for Ads, Telecom, and Space at Amazon. I'm sure he's going to bring a very interesting perspective, not only from the US side, but also from Europe, because Kuiper has significant investments in Europe, and they are constantly increasing that. So, Jordi, I hand over to you, and please give us your thoughts on the Space Act.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be as brief as I can, because I'm realizing I'm the last thing standing between lunch or even sleeping. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. Everything that I'm going to say now, you can find a lot more details in our submission. We filed that submission on Friday, just before the deadline. So you can find a lot more details there if what I'm saying is interested, or you're interested in knowing more about our position. Now, as some of you may know, in 2019, Amazon launched or announced an initiative to launch a low Earth orbit satellite constellation, Project Kuiper. And what we want is basically to offer fast and reliable broadband to communities around the world, in India also, but also in Europe. And I think that project is going to bring many benefits to the European Union, but also to other regions in terms of commercial partnerships, and also in helping bridge the digital divide. We've done a couple of studies that look specifically to the European Union. We looked, for example, at the economic contribution that our partnerships with Arianespace and Beyond Gravity can bring to the EU space industry. Arianespace, for those of you who do not know, will be a key partner for us to launch our satellites from the European Union. In terms of digital divide, we've also conducted, and just to summarize that economic contribution, around 1/4 of the investments that Amazon has announced for Project Kuiper will be directed to the EU space industry. I know that we have many other collaborations like that in other geographies. In terms of the digital divide, the study that we've conducted here in the European Union shows that LEO satellite broadband constellations can help governments save significant amounts of money in terms of subsidies for fiber in remote and rural areas. The study that we conducted in the European Union estimates that up to 37% of fiber subsidies can be saved by relying instead on commercially offered LEO satellite broadband. Now, if I move to space safety and sustainability considerations, where these have been very important for Kuiper from day one. Amazon Project Kuiper is a part of the European Space Agency's Zero Debris Charter, and safety and sustainability considerations have influenced the way that we've built our constellations, from the orbits that we select, how we build and design our satellites, and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of what we welcome in the EU Space Act, I think I'm going to very much align and repeat what Cécile was saying earlier. I think there's broad alignment from the industry in welcoming further work on space traffic coordination and ensuring safe space operations. So all provisions around the development of collision avoidance services, maneuverability, trackability, information sharing, those are areas where we think that there's a lot more work that can be done and a lot more coordination that can be done globally. And we think that all industry players would benefit very much from those aspects. Now, areas in which we think the improvements in the text would be welcomed, and I'll highlight 3 areas. The first one is we've heard a lot of discussions around the level playing field. And of course, we understand that EU institutions don't want to impose a regulatory framework on just EU operators, and therefore they want to extend the scope of application of that framework to any company that is providing commercial services in the EU. However, what we see currently in the text is that actually the text delivers an unlevel playing field, because in our view, it's imposing more onerous obligations on non-EU operators than on EU operators. And I'll give you 2 examples of that. First of all, a lot of the provisions on safety requirements will depend on categorizations of operators, and in particular, there is the creation of this group of operators, giga constellations that have more than 1,000 satellites, that will have stricter requirements. Well, this is a group that is going to apply to non-EU operators, not to EU operators. And we don't support those kind of provisions. We think that safety requirements should apply to all operators uniformly, not depending on the fleet or the number of spacecraft that they are operating. And we don't think there is a reason why an operator with just one satellite should have to meet safety requirements that are 50% less safe than an operator with more satellites. As was mentioned earlier, one single satellite can create big problems in terms of space safety, and so a uniform application will be in our view better. The second area in which we don't see a level playing field is in the fact that the registration and the authorization processes for EU and non-EU operators is very different. In the case of EU operators, it goes through member states, and there's a statutory 12-month deadline to complete that process. In the case of non-EU operators, it is a lot more complex governance framework, with, on the one hand, a new compliance board created within USPA with member states that will give a recommendation after 5 months, but then that recommendation will go to the Commission, and there is no statutory deadline in the text for the final decision from the Commission. We think that there should be a statutory deadline, and also that this system is going to be a lot more complex than the governance procedure for EU operators. So that's another area in which we see different rules for EU and non-EU operators. The second point is on technical requirements. I think this is also something that most industry players are highlighting. We think that the text should align with international standards and best practices. And we think that the best way of doing that is basically to taking existing international standards from organizations like the Interagency Space Debris Committee, the IADC, which, by the way, the Indian Space Research Organization is also part of, and basically, adopt requirements in the text that are aligned with the international standards from IADC. And the way I think about this is, for me, these international standards reflect 2 things. First of all, they reflect a consensus between institutions worldwide, because the IADC encompasses most space agencies from around the world. So it's a consensus-driven process. And secondly, they reflect a calibration between, on the one hand, requirements that are effective and efficient in improving safety and sustainability. So they're science-based, they're backed by evidence, and so on. And at the same time, they take into account potential costs for industry. So international standards from IADC reflect this well-calibrated balance. Or the fear that we have is that if the EU Space Act deviates from those international standards, then you're upsetting that well-calibrated balance between the two forces that I was mentioning earlier. Finally, and with this I finish, we see also when it comes to reflectivity and the inclusion of the visual magnitude 7 brightness mitigation, we see this with concern because there's currently no technology that is capable of mitigating visual brightness to that level across all operational situations. And this is something that has actually also been recognized by the International Astronomical Union in their guidelines. They recognize that there's no technology capable of mitigating brightness to that level. So we do not support strict requirements in the regulation that basically cannot be met by industry players. And with this, I'll finish and thank you everyone for listening to me.
Thank you, Jordi. Thank you so much for your remarks. And I think especially what you said about taking international standards and trying to use standards which many countries have already agreed to, which they have already consented to, and there is consensus for. I think that is very relevant because that is the first step to try to bring everyone together. That is the first step towards, how countries can start to collaborate with each other on important aspects like sustainability. If today there's something that we've seen is that everyone across the globe, people are here from several different countries, they've all recognized the importance of having legislation that would govern things like sustainability. It's just that we just need to find more moments like these to have conversations and to push this into a more sustained dialogue where all the different stakeholders can come together. So thank you very much for listening to me. And now I'm going to quickly hand over to Mr. Anil Prakash to give the closing remarks for this webinar.
Thank you, Devanshu. It was fantastic, and I think the whole aspect has been covered fully well, and we have gathered a lot of insight, and that will help us to collate our further information and submit our addendum. I think Suzanne is very proactively answering the question in chat box, the people, and thank you, Suzanne, for taking and answering those. And we have a very little time for regular Q&A, but we have noted down your, inputs and suggestions. We will definitely come back to you. And it is thanks to everyone for their patience, and especially our resource person for giving up their great insight. And thank you all for taking your time for late night or early morning in Washington. So really, really thankful. Thank you, GraySpace team, and also Sagar Sangam and Devanshu for your extremely hard work on collating the information and submission. Really, and I really Suzanne for suggestion, and I'm really thankful to you. If you wanted to say any parting word.
I'm sorry, if you're addressing me, I didn't understand really the request.
No, I said thank you very much for taking very proactive way and also answering the question which is chat box, and really thankful, and really it is very great to have you here, and we assured you that we will be working with you closely along with the GraySpace team and for constructive dialogue, and thank you very much once again. So okay, for everyone, to be there, and we'll keep in touch with you, the other matters with you. Thank you very much. And okay, Devanshu, and goodbye, everybody. Good night and good afternoon to all. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.